It's time to hydrate our yeast, and so what I've got here is a bowl that I've sanitized, and I poured a little bit, about a half a cup of distilled water in there, and I'm just going to sprinkle the yeast on top of the water. And again, there's no need to make a starter. We're just gonna hydrate this yeast. It's gonna get good and hungry when it wakes up. So we're gonna make sure that we just pour the whole thing of yeast on there, and I'm just gonna cover it now with a plate that I've also sanitized. And we're just going to let that sit for about 5 minutes until, or as long as it takes while we're brewing. Okay, so we've taken this off the heat. We've let it cool down for about a half an hour. And just like with beer or wine or any other alcohol, it's real important when we pitch our yeast that we get to a proper temperature, and which is going to be about 68 degrees. The real secret to this is that we've kept our 4 gallons of apple juice in the refrigerator overnight so that they're below like 40 degrees. And the idea is that if we add 4 gallons of 40-degree apple juice to our 150-degree apple slurry, it should even out to about 68, 70 degrees. So we're going to go ahead and do that now. Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to add these 2 gallons of apple juice first, and then we're going to add the hot apple slurry in. The idea is that if we add the hot apple slurry in first and then the cold on top of it, we run the risk of shattering the glass. And it's important to note that because it's in the refrigerator, the refrigerator is a really bacteria-laden place. So I actually have sprayed down these jugs with the Star San before I do this. And I'm just going to go ahead now and add these in. Okay, and now for our hot apple slurry. And now we're just going to top it off to about between 5.5 and 6 gallons with the rest of our cold apple juice. Alright, so we've got our entire apple concoction poured into here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to add, this is a sanitized cork, and I'm going to add that in. And what we need to do now is we need to aerate this, just like we do with any sort of beer or wine. We need to aerate it. And the best way that I found to aerate it is just to shake the sun out.
Shake that body. Shake that body. You're doing fine. Shake that body. Shake that body. Shake that body for me.
Alright, now all that's left is to add our yeast. Okay, I'd like to talk for a minute about what we're going to do with this cider once it's fully fermented. Because the yeast will eat any sugars until it reaches about 10% alcohol, we really only have a few options available to us. Now, if you like a real dry apple cider, then you can bottle this, add a little priming sugar, and let it go the way you normally would. However, if you want a slightly sweeter cider, which I think a lot of us probably will, then what you'll need to do is, one, you can keg it, which is what I recommend. And what you would do is you would put in, once it's done fermenting completely, you would add some potassium metabisulfates, and then you can flavor it with either sugar or pear juice or apple juice or whatever flavor you want to add it to the sweetness that you want, and go ahead and you can carbonate it from there and keg it. Now, if you don't have the luxury of kegging, or you really have to have it in bottles, then you have a couple other options. One is you can sweeten it with a sugar like maltol, Splenda, NutraSweet. These are sugars that don't ferment. So by putting those in and then putting some priming sugar in, the priming sugar will ferment all the way out, the other sugars won't. So that will give you a slightly sweeter taste. I personally don't like the chemical sugars, but you can do that. Now, if you don't want to do that, then there is one other option available, which is you can bottle this with a little more sugar than you want. Let it ferment for a few days until it reaches the desired amount of carbonation, and then you can boil the bottles. I would not boil them, but you heat them up enough to kill the yeast off. If you do this, you got to be really careful that, one, you're protected in case the bottles explode. So that means, keeping a lid on it. You also want to be really careful that you don't heat the water up too quickly. I wouldn't go I would put the water in at room temperature and then slowly bring it up to a temperature of 150 to 160 degrees. That's sufficient to kill off the yeast. At that point, I would turn the heat off, let them return back to room temperature, and at that point you should be good. Well, so that's pretty much it. What I'm going to do now, I've got a cork in this, and I'm going to go ahead and take it to a cool, dark place. Between 68 and 80 degrees is probably fine for this. Let it ferment out between 7 and 10 days. In the next 24 to 48 hours, this is going to start bubbling through the airlock pretty quickly, and probably a bubble every second. When that slows down to about one bubble every minute or less, at that point I usually give it a couple extra days just to make sure that it's totally fermented out, in which case I'm going to go ahead and keg it, and we can go ahead and do what we need to do with it. Don't worry, as you can see the yeast is kind of settled on the top here. I wouldn't worry too much about stirring it in. It's gonna, as that yeast multiplies and grows, it will get to every part of this. And actually, by the process of you carrying it to the dark place, you'll probably have shaken it up plenty anyway. So that's pretty much it. We've made ourselves a nice apple cider. I hope you have enjoyed it, and I hope that you make one and love it.